The bullet that shattered the schoolhouse window on that sweltering August morning in 1878 was meant for someone else, but it changed everything for Teresa Morgan anyway. She stood at the front of the classroom in the dusty town of Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, her chalk still raised to the board where she had been writing out arithmetic problems for her students. The children screamed and dove under their desks as fragments of glass scattered across the wooden floor like diamonds catching the harsh sunlight. Teresa's heart hammered against her ribs, but her first instinct was not to protect herself. She rushed toward the window to pull down the shade, to shield her students from whatever violence was unfolding in the street below. "Everyone stay down," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Stay quiet and stay low." Through the broken window, she could see two men on horseback firing at each other as they raced down the main street, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still air. The crack of gunfire echoed between the buildings, and Teresa heard shouting from the saloon across the way. This was not the first time violence had erupted in Willow Creek, and she knew it would not be the last. The Arizona Territory was still rough and largely lawless in 1878, with disputes more often settled by guns than by words. When the shooting finally stopped and an uneasy silence settled over the street, Teresa counted her students. All 12 were accounted for, their faces pale but unharmed. She spent the next hour calming them, telling them stories and leading them in singing songs until the fear left their eyes. She swept up the glass herself, not wanting small hands to be cut, and fashioned a temporary covering for the window from oilcloth she kept in her supply closet. It was near the end of the school day when Harold Pemberton, head of the school board and owner of the largest cattle operation in the county, stormed into her classroom. He was a broad man with a thick gray mustache and eyes that were always calculating, always measuring the worth of everything and everyone around him. Behind him came two other board members, Samuel Cooper and Winston Drake, both wealthy men who seemed to enjoy the power their positions gave them over the small community. "Miss Morgan," Pemberton said without preamble, not bothering to remove his hat in her presence. "We need to have a word with you outside." Teresa glanced at her students, who were supposed to be reading quietly at their desks, but were now watching with wide, curious eyes. "Can this wait until after I have dismissed the children for the day? We have only 20 minutes remaining." "Now, Miss Morgan." She felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. She asked the oldest student, a girl of 13 named Mary Fletcher, to watch over the others, and then she followed the 3 men outside into the harsh afternoon sun. The temperature had to be over 90 degrees, and sweat began to bead on her forehead almost immediately. Pemberton crossed his arms over his chest. "We have received multiple complaints about your teaching methods, Miss Morgan." Teresa blinked in surprise. "Complaints? What kind of complaints?" "You have been allowing the Mexican children to stay after school for extra lessons," Cooper said, his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "And you have been giving food to students who arrive hungry," Drake added. Teresa looked from one man to the next, trying to understand what she was hearing. "Yes, I have done both of those things. The Garcia children and the Ramirez boy are bright students who want to learn, but English is not their first language. They need additional help to keep up with the others. And as for the food, I cannot teach a child who is too hungry to concentrate. I have been bringing extra biscuits and fruit from my own home. I do not see what is wrong with any of this." Pemberton's face reddened. "What is wrong, Miss Morgan, is that you are showing favoritism to children who do not deserve it. You are wasting time on students who will never amount to anything more than field workers and servants. And you are being too soft, too kind. These children need discipline, not coddling. The words hit Teresa like a physical blow. She had been teaching in Willow Creek for 2 years, ever since she arrived from St. Louis after her parents died in a cholera outbreak. She had poured her heart into this work, believing that education could change lives, that every child deserved a chance to learn and grow regardless of their background or the color of their skin. "With all due respect, Mr. Pemberton, I disagree completely," she said, lifting her chin. "Every child in my classroom deserves my attention and care. I will not treat some as less worthy than others simply because of where their families come from." "Then you leave us no choice," Pemberton said coldly. "The school board has voted, and we are terminating your employment effective immediately. You will pack your belongings and vacate the teacherage by the end of the week." Teresa felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The teacherage was a small cabin behind the schoolhouse that came with her position. Without this job, she had no home and no income. She had no family to return to, no money saved for such an emergency. But even as panic began to claw at her throat, she found herself standing straighter. "I see," she said quietly. "And who will teach the children?" "We will find someone more suitable," Drake said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Someone who understands how things work out here." They left her standing there in the dust, and Teresa felt tears sting her eyes for the first time. Not tears of sadness, but of anger and frustration. She had tried so hard to make a difference, to give these children the tools they would need to build better lives. And now, it was being torn away because she had shown kindness, because she had refused to treat some children as less than others. She returned to her classroom, and somehow made it through the final 20 minutes of the day. When she dismissed the students, several of them seemed to sense that something was wrong. Little Rosa Garcia, a sweet 7-year-old with dark braids and enormous brown eyes, tugged on Teresa's skirt. "Are you sad, Miss Morgan?" the girl asked in careful English. Teresa knelt down and took the child's hands in hers. "I am a little sad, Rosa, but you must keep working hard on your reading, all right? Keep practicing every day." "I will," Rosa promised solemnly. After the last child had gone, Teresa sat at her desk and allowed herself to cry. She wept for the injustice of it all, for the children who would suffer because small-minded men held power over who deserved education and who did not. She wept for her own uncertain future, and for the dreams she had nurtured of making a real difference in this rough frontier town. She did not hear the door open, did not realize anyone had entered until a deep voice said, "Excuse me, madam. Are you all right?" Teresa looked up quickly, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the late afternoon sun. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. As he stepped further into the room and removed his hat, she could see his face more clearly. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin, dark brown hair that was a bit too long, and eyes that were a striking shade of gray-blue. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, worn leather boots, and a bandana tied around his neck. "I am fine, thank you," Teresa said, though her voice was thick with tears. She stood and smoothed her skirt, trying to regain some dignity. "The school day is over. Did you need something?" The man twisted his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. "I am Samuel Vance. I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles south of town. My brother and his wife have 3 children, and I was passing by when I saw Pemberton and his friends leaving. I know I should not have, but I stood outside the window and I heard what they said to you." Shame washed over Teresa. "Then you know I have been dismissed." "I know they are fools," Samuel said bluntly. "I've heard people in town talking about you. about how you are the best teacher this school has ever had. My nephew Johnny is one of your students, and he has learned more in the past year than in all his previous schooling combined. He actually wants to go to school now, comes home excited about what you taught him. Teresa felt a fresh wave of emotion, but this time it was touched with gratitude that someone understood, that someone saw value in what she had been trying to do. Johnny is a wonderful student. He has a real gift for mathematics. He gets that from his mother, Samuel said with a slight smile. But what I came to say is this. There are a lot of folks out here, ranchers and their families, who live too far from town to send their children to school regularly. Some of them have been talking for years about trying to find a teacher who would be willing to travel to a few different ranches, maybe spend a week at each place, teaching the children. It would not be easy work. The traveling would be hard, and you would be staying in rough conditions sometimes. But if you are interested, I think I could convince them to pool their resources and hire you. Teresa stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would do that, but you do not even know me. I know you were fired for being too kind, Samuel said simply. And I know my nephew thinks you hung the moon. That is enough for me. Besides, those children out on the ranches deserve an education too, and they are not going to get it otherwise. Most of their parents can read and write well enough to get by, but they do not have the time or the knowledge to really teach them properly. I would need to think about it, Teresa said, though hope was already blooming in her chest. I would need to know more details about where I would be staying, how the payment would work, how many children we are talking about. Of course, Samuel said. Why do not you come out to the Double R tomorrow? You could meet my brother Jake and his wife Emma, see the place, talk to some of the other families. I could come get you in the morning if that suits you. Teresa hesitated for only a moment before nodding. What choice did she have, really? But beyond that, there was something about this quiet cowboy with his direct manner and kind eyes that made her want to trust him. That would be very kind of you, Mr. Vance. Samuel, he said, and I will be here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning if that works for you. It does. Thank you, Samuel. He nodded, placed his hat back on his head and turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. For what it is worth, Miss Morgan, I think you did the right thing. Those children you helped, they will remember your kindness for the rest of their lives. That matters more than what Pemberton and his friends think. After he left, Teresa sat back down at her desk, her mind whirling. She had gone from despair to hope in the span of a single conversation. She did not know if this plan would work, did not know if she could really make a life traveling from ranch to ranch teaching children. But she knew she had to try. That evening, she went to visit Father Miguel at the small Catholic church on the edge of town. The priest was a kind man in his 50s who had always been supportive of her work with the Mexican children. He was outraged when he heard about her dismissal. "This is wrong," he said, shaking his head. "Those men, they talk about Christian values, but they do not know the first thing about what Christ taught. To turn away children who want to learn, to punish someone for showing kindness, it is not right." "I know," Teresa said, "but there may be another opportunity." She told him about Samuel's offer, and Father Miguel listened carefully. "This Samuel Vance," he said thoughtfully. "I know of him. Good man, from what I hear. Honest, hardworking. His brother's ranch is one of the more successful operations in the area. If he says he can arrange this, I believe he can." "I hope so," Teresa said. "I am not sure what else I can do. I have no money to leave town and start over somewhere else." "You have faith and courage," Father Miguel said, patting her hand. "That is more valuable than money. You will find your way, my child. God has a plan for you." Teresa wished she had the priest's certainty, but she tried to hold on to hope as she walked back to the teacherage in the fading light. She packed a small bag for the trip to the ranch the next day, choosing her most practical dress and her sturdy boots. She did not sleep well that night, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. Samuel arrived precisely at 8 o'clock the next morning, driving a wagon with a team of 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up to the seat, and they set off down the dusty road that led south out of town. The morning was still relatively cool, though Teresa knew the heat would be oppressive by midday. "How long have you worked at the Double R?" she asked as they rode, wanting to fill the silence and learn more about this man who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. "About 5 years," Samuel said, keeping his eyes on the road. "I came to Arizona from Texas after the war, wanted a fresh start, I suppose. Jake, my older brother, he had already settled here with Emma and they offered me a job. I have been here ever since." "You were in the war?" Teresa asked, though she could have guessed. Most men of Samuel's age had served in the Civil War in one capacity or another. "I was," he said, his voice tightening slightly. "But that was a long time ago and I do not talk about it much." Teresa heard the note of pain in his voice and did not press. She had heard enough stories from veterans to know that many of them carried scars that could not be seen. "I understand. My father served as well, though he was with the Union in Missouri. Were you in St. Louis during the war?" Samuel asked, and she was grateful that he was willing to change the subject to her history instead. "Yes, though I was just a child. I was born in 1856, so I do not remember much about the early years of the war. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, it was nearly over. But I remember the tension in the city, the way families were torn apart by which side they supported. Missouri was terrible during the war, with violence from both sides." "It was a hard time everywhere," Samuel said quietly. "But we survived, and now we are trying to build something better. That is what matters." They rode in companionable silence for a while, and Teresa found herself studying Samuel's profile. There was something solid and dependable about him, something that made her feel safe despite the fact that she barely knew him. He had strong features, a straight nose and a firm jaw, and his hands on the reins were capable and sure. She noticed the way he scanned the horizon constantly, always aware of his surroundings, and she realized this was a man who had learned to be cautious, to watch for danger. The Double R Ranch sprawled across a wide valley between red rock hills. Teresa could see cattle grazing in the distance and several buildings clustered together. A main house, a barn, a bunkhouse, and various other structures. It was more prosperous looking than she had expected, with whitewashed fences and a vegetable garden beside the house. A woman came out onto the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 30 years old, with blonde hair pinned up in a practical bun and a warm, open face. 3 children tumbled out after her, ranging in age from about 5 to 10. "You must be Miss Morgan," the woman called out with a friendly smile. "I am Emma Vance. Samuel sent word last night that he was bringing you out today. Welcome to the Double R." Samuel helped Teresa down from the wagon, and she found herself immediately surrounded by the children. She recognized Johnny, a sturdy boy of 9 with his uncle's gray-blue eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "Miss Morgan," he said excitedly, "are you really going to teach us here? That would be so great. I could learn every day instead of just when we can get into town." "We will see," Teresa said, smiling down at him. "I need to talk to your parents first and figure out if this can work." Emma shooed the children away and invited Teresa inside. The house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and cheerful curtains at the windows. A man who could only be Samuel's brother emerged from a back room. Jake Vance was slightly taller than Samuel and had the same basic features, but his hair was lighter and his eyes were more green than blue. He greeted Teresa with a firm handshake and an assessing look that was not unfriendly, just careful. Over coffee and fresh biscuits, they discussed the plan. Jake explained that there were 6 ranching families within a 20-mile radius who had a total of 19 children between them, ranging in age from 5 to 15. Most of these children had little formal education beyond basic reading and writing that their parents had taught them. "What we were thinking," Jake said, "is that you could spend 2 weeks at each ranch teaching the children there. Some families only have 1 or 2 children, so we thought maybe you could combine a couple of the smaller families together, have the children come to one ranch for lessons. It would take about 3 months to cycle through all the families, and then you could start over again." "Where would I stay?" Teresa asked practically. "Each family would provide room and board while you are staying with them," Emma said. "It would not be fancy, but you would have a private room and meals, and we would all contribute to your salary. We figured we could pay you $60 a month, which is more than you were making at the school in town." Teresa did her mental calculations. It was indeed more than her previous salary, and with room and board included, she could actually save some money. "What about supplies? Books, paper, slates?" "We have already talked about that," Jake said. "Each family will contribute what they can. Some of the children already have primers and basic readers. We can pool our resources and order additional materials from back east if needed." It was more organized than Teresa had expected, and she felt her excitement growing. "It sounds like you have put a lot of thought into this." "Samuel is very persuasive when he wants to be," Emma said with a fond look at her brother-in-law. "When he came back last night and told us about what happened to you, he would not stop talking about how this could be the solution we have been looking for. He rode out to 3 different ranches late last night to talk to the families, got them all to agree to the plan." Teresa turned to look at Samuel, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. He shrugged, looking a bit embarrassed. "It just made sense. We needed a teacher, and you needed a position. I do not see why we should not help each other." But Teresa saw it for what it was, an act of extraordinary kindness from a man who had gone out of his way to help a stranger. He had ridden through the night, spent his own time and energy to create an opportunity for her. It touched her deeply. Over the next week, Teresa met with all 6 families and saw each of the ranches. The Hendersons had 4 children and a larger spread to the west. The Morales family had 3 children and ran sheep instead of cattle on their land to the east. The Tanners had 2 children and a small horse breeding operation. The Crawfords had 5 children ranging from 6 to 15 and one of the oldest established ranches in the area. The Mitchells had 3 children and were relative newcomers, having arrived from Kansas just 2 years earlier. And of course, there were the Vances with their 3. Each family welcomed her warmly, and Teresa could see the hunger for education in the children's eyes. Many of them had never had a real teacher before, had never experienced structured lessons, or had access to books beyond the Bible and perhaps a farmer's almanac. The parents were hardworking people who valued education, but simply did not have the time or resources to provide it themselves. By the end of the week, Teresa had agreed to take the position. The families decided that she would start at the Double R Ranch, spending the first 2 weeks there while they finalized arrangements and acquired supplies. This would also give her time to assess each child's abilities and create lesson plans accordingly. The day she was supposed to vacate the teacherage, Samuel arrived with his wagon to help her move her belongings. She did not have much: her clothes, a few books, her mother's china tea set, and some personal items. As she took one last look at the little cabin that had been her home, she felt a mixture of sadness and relief. This chapter of her life was closing, but a new one was beginning, In town, people stared as Samuel loaded her trunk into the wagon. Teresa held her head high, refusing to show any shame or regret. She saw Harold Pemberton standing outside the general store, watching with a disapproving frown. On impulse, she walked over to him. "Mr. Pemberton," she said coolly, "I wanted to let you know that I will be teaching the children at the ranches outside of town. So you see, I will still be educating young minds, still showing them the kindness you found so objectionable. Good day." She did not wait for his response, just turned and walked back to the wagon where Samuel was waiting. He was trying not to smile as he helped her up. "That was something," he said as they drove out of town. "It felt good," Teresa admitted. "Probably childish of me, but it felt good." "You are entitled," Samuel said. "That man deserves to know he did not break you." As they drove toward the ranch, Teresa felt as though she could breathe properly for the first time in days. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and the landscape stretched out endlessly in all directions, full of possibility. She glanced at Samuel and felt a flutter in her chest that she had not expected. She barely knew this man, but he had changed her life completely in just a few days. There was something about him that drew her, something beyond gratitude. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why did you do all this for me? You do not know me. I could be a terrible teacher for all you know." Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I suppose I did it because it was the right thing to do. But also, I have seen too much cruelty in my life, too many people doing wrong by each other. When I saw those men punishing you for being kind, it made me angry. I wanted to do something about it, to prove that kindness should be rewarded, not punished." "Does that make sense?" "It does," Teresa said softly. "And thank you, truly. You have given me hope when I thought I had lost everything." "Well," Samuel said, a hint of warmth in his voice, "I am glad I could help. And I think you are going to do real good with these children. They need someone like you, someone who cares about them as individuals, not just as names on a roster." When they arrived at the Double R, Emma helped Teresa settle into a small room off the main house. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, a small dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was simple but clean and comfortable, and Teresa felt more at home immediately than she had in months. That evening, she ate dinner with the Vance family around their large kitchen table. Jake and Emma's children, Johnny, 7-year-old Alice, and 5-year-old Thomas, peppered her with questions about what they would be learning. Samuel was there too, and Teresa found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way he listened quietly to the conversation, the occasional small smile that played at the corners of his mouth when one of the children said something amusing. After dinner, while Emma put the younger children to bed, Teresa helped clean up the kitchen. Samuel came in from checking on the horses and found her washing dishes at the pump. "You do not have to do that," he said. "You are a guest here." "I need to earn my keep," Teresa said. "Besides, I like feeling useful." Samuel picked up a dish towel and began drying the plates she washed. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before he said, "What made you decide to become a teacher?" Teresa thought about her answer, wanting to be honest with him. "My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught me to love learning, to see education as a gift that could open doors. After she and my father died, I felt lost. Teaching gave me purpose again. It made me feel connected to her memory and gave me a way to make a difference in the world. Maybe that sounds naive." "It does not sound naive at all," Samuel said. "It sounds like you found your calling. That is more than most people can say. What about you?" Teresa asked, turning to look at him. "Did you always want to be a cowboy?" He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that she found she liked very much. "I do not know that anyone dreams of being a cowboy when they are young. It is hard work, long hours, not much glory in it. But I like working with my hands, like being outside, like the feeling of accomplishment when we bring in a good herd or when a sick animal recovers. And I like the simplicity of it. Out here, things make sense. You work hard, you are honest, you take care of your own. There is no pretense, no politics. But there must be more you want, Teresa said. You cannot want to just work on your brother's ranch forever. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his hands stilling on the dish he was drying. I had dreams once, he said finally, before the war. I was going to have my own spread, build a house, raise a family. But the war, it changed things, changed me. For a long time afterward, I did not think I deserved those things anymore, did not think I could have them. And now, Teresa asked gently. He met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart skip. Now, I am starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe it is not too late after all. Before Teresa could respond, Emma returned to the kitchen, breaking the moment. But as Teresa went to bed that night in her small room, she could not stop thinking about Samuel's words, about the vulnerability she had heard in his voice. She wondered what he had experienced during the war, what pain he carried. And she wondered if maybe, just maybe, fate had brought them together for a reason beyond simple chance. The next morning, Teresa began her first official day as a traveling teacher. Jake and Samuel had built a simple table and benches under a large cottonwood tree near the house, creating an outdoor classroom. Emma said the weather was still good enough for outdoor lessons, and the fresh air would do the children good. Teresa started with an assessment, testing each child individually to see where they were academically. Johnny was indeed gifted at mathematics and read at a level beyond his age. Alice was strong in reading but struggled with numbers. Little Thomas was just beginning to learn his letters. Teresa made notes and began planning lessons that would challenge each child appropriately, while still allowing them to learn together. Samuel often worked near the house during those first few days, and Teresa noticed him watching the lessons sometimes from a distance. Once, when she looked up from helping Alice with a subtraction problem, she caught him leaning against the corral fence, a slight smile on his face as he listened to her explaining the concept. When he realized she had seen him, he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement and went back to work, but not before she saw a faint color rise to his cheeks. In the evenings, after the children were in bed and the ranch work was done, Samuel and Teresa began taking walks together. It started casually enough, with Samuel offering to show her around the property, pointing out landmarks and explaining the operation of the ranch. But soon it became a routine, something they both looked forward to. They talked about everything and nothing during those walks. Teresa told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about the small school where her mother had taught, about the books she loved to read. Samuel shared stories about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the bond between him and his brother. One evening, about a week into her stay at the Double R, they walked out to a small rise that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the air was finally starting to cool after another scorching day. "It is beautiful here," Teresa said, taking in the view. "I never imagined I would end up in a place like this." "No regrets about leaving St. Louis?" Samuel asked. "Sometimes I miss the city, the convenience of having shops and theaters nearby, but no, I do not regret it. Life is simpler here in some ways, harder in others, but it feels more real if that makes sense." "It does," Samuel said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I am glad you came here, Teresa. Glad that you agreed to teach these children." It was the first time he had used her first name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her despite the warm evening air. "I am glad too, Samuel. This feels right. The teaching, being out here, all of it." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed even more striking. "There is something I have been wanting to say to you, but I have not been sure if it is appropriate or if it is too soon." Teresa's heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "I have never met anyone quite like you," he said, his voice low and earnest. "The way you care about those children, the way you stood up to Pemberton even though it cost you everything, the way you took a chance on this plan even though it meant leaving behind everything familiar. You are brave and kind and strong, and I find myself thinking about you all the time. I know we have only known each other a short while, but I would like to get to know you better if you are willing. I would like to court you properly, if you will have me." Teresa felt as though all the air had left her lungs. She had been attracted to Samuel from almost the first moment she met him, had felt the connection growing between them during their evening walks and stolen conversations. But she had not expected him to speak so openly, so honestly about his feelings. "I would like that very much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been thinking about you too, Samuel, more than I probably should." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Really, really," she confirmed, unable to keep from smiling herself. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. They stood there on the rise, holding hands and watching the last of the sunset fade. And Teresa felt a profound sense of rightness, as though all the pain and uncertainty of the past weeks had led her to exactly where she was supposed to be. Over the following days, their courtship unfolded quietly but steadily. Samuel made small gestures that showed his growing affection. Bringing her wildflowers he found while checking the fence lines, helping her gather firewood for the outdoor classroom on cool mornings, saving her the choicest piece of meat at dinner. Teresa found herself looking for excuses to be near him, lingering in the barn when he was tending the horses, asking questions about ranch work that she did not really need answered just to hear his voice. Jake and Emma watched this development with obvious pleasure. One evening, Emma cornered Teresa in the kitchen while they were preparing dinner. "I hope you know how special you are to Samuel," Emma said quietly, keeping her voice low so the children would not hear. "I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. He has been alone for so long, shut himself off from the possibility of love, but you have opened something up in him." "He is special to me too," Teresa admitted. "I was not looking for this, did not expect it, but I cannot seem to help how I feel." "Good," Emma said firmly. "You both deserve happiness, and I think you are perfect for each other." The 2 weeks at the Double R passed far too quickly. Teresa was sad to leave when it came time to move to the next ranch, though she knew she would return in a few months. The Henderson family was next, and their ranch was quite different from the Double R. The Hendersons, Frank and Margaret, were older, in their 40s, and their 4 children ranged from 8 to 14. They had a prosperous operation but a more formal household, and Teresa found herself missing the easy warmth of the Vance family. Samuel rode over twice during her 2 weeks with the Hendersons, ostensibly to conduct business with Frank, but really to see Teresa. They stole what moments they could together, walking down to the creek that ran through the Henderson property or sitting on the porch after dark. It was never enough time, but every minute together felt precious. The pattern continued as Teresa moved from ranch to ranch. She spent 2 weeks with the Morales family, where she worked hard to teach the lessons in both English and Spanish, knowing that the children would benefit from being fluent in both languages. The Morales parents were grateful for her efforts and her respect for their culture, and their children flourished under her instruction. At the Tanner Ranch, she taught alongside the sound of horses neighing and hooves thundering in the training corrals. The Mitchell family was struggling financially, and Teresa could see the strain in the parents' faces, but they were determined that their children would have better opportunities than they had. At the Crawford Ranch, the oldest child, 15-year-old Daniel, was so hungry for knowledge that Teresa found herself creating advanced lessons just for him, teaching him algebra and Latin that she had learned from her mother. Through it all, Samuel was a constant presence. He found reasons to visit whichever ranch she was at, sometimes bringing supplies or messages, sometimes just showing up because he could not stay away. Their relationship deepened with each meeting, moving from the tentative early stages of courtship to something more solid and lasting. 3 months after Teresa had started her circuit, she returned to the Double R Ranch. It was November now, and the weather was cooler. She would need to hold lessons indoors during the winter months. Jake and Emma welcomed her back like family, and the children were overjoyed to have her there again. On her first evening back, Samuel asked if she would take a ride with him. He saddled 2 horses, and they rode out toward the rise where he had first asked to court her. The sky was clear and full of stars, and Teresa wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. At the rise, Samuel helped her dismount, and they stood looking out over the valley. The lights of the ranch house twinkled in the distance. "I have been thinking a lot these past few months," Samuel said, still holding her hand from helping her down. "About what I want from life, about what matters most to me, and I keep coming back to the same answer. You, Teresa, you matter most to me." Teresa's breath caught. "Samuel, I know it has only been a few months, and maybe you think it is too soon. But I am 30 years old, and I have wasted too much time already. I know what I want. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me. I want to help you teach these children and watch you change their lives. I want to build that house I dreamed about before the war and fill it with our own children someday. I want everything with you, Teresa. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Teresa's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I love you so much." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood there holding each other under the stars. When he finally kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Teresa felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. They were married a month later, just before Christmas, in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Father Miguel traveled out from town to perform the service, and all the ranching families gathered to celebrate. Even some people from Willow Creek came, families who had supported Teresa's teaching and were happy to see her find love. Harold Pemberton was not invited, but Teresa heard later that he had made disparaging comments about her marriage to a common cowboy. She did not care. She had everything she needed right here: meaningful work, a community that valued her, and a man who loved her completely. Jake and Emma gave them the small foreman's cabin on the property as a wedding gift. It was just 2 rooms, but it was theirs. Over the winter months, while Teresa continued teaching, Samuel spent his free time fixing up the cabin, making it more comfortable and adding little touches that he knew would please her. Shelves for her books, a better stove for heat, a rocking chair he built with his own hands. They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. After so much upheaval and uncertainty, they had found peace in each other. Teresa continued her circuit of the ranches, but now Samuel traveled with her whenever he could, helping to transport materials and making sure she was safe on the roads between properties. In the spring of 1879, Teresa discovered she was pregnant. Samuel was overjoyed, immediately becoming protective and fussing over her health. Emma laughed at his concern but helped him learn what to expect, and how to care for a pregnant wife. You would think no woman had ever had a baby before, the way he is acting, Emma teased one afternoon while Teresa was teaching. Samuel had just ridden by for the third time that day, ostensibly checking the fence line but really just making sure Teresa was not overdoing it. "He is sweet," Teresa said, smiling. "Overcautious, maybe, but sweet." She continued teaching throughout her pregnancy, finally stopping only in the last month when travel became too uncomfortable. In October of 1879, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Jacob William, after both of his uncles. Samuel held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at Teresa with awe and love. "You have given me everything," he whispered. "Everything I thought I could never have." "We gave it to each other," Teresa corrected gently. As Jacob grew, Teresa took him with her when she resumed teaching, carrying him in a sling at first, and then letting him play near the outdoor classroom as he got older. The children at the ranches adored the baby, and Teresa found that having a young child around actually enhanced her teaching. The older children took pride in helping care for Jacob, and it gave them practical lessons in responsibility and nurturing. 2 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah Rose, and she had her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. Samuel had saved enough money by then to buy a piece of land adjacent to the Double R, and he began building the house he had dreamed of, the one he thought he would never have. It was not a grand house by any means, just a simple ranch home with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor that Teresa converted into a schoolroom during the winter months. But it was theirs, built with Samuel's own hands and filled with love. By 1882, the teaching circuit had become so successful that 2 of the ranching families had hired a second traveling teacher to help Teresa cover more ground. The original 6 families had expanded to 12 as word spread about the program. Children who had received Teresa's instruction were now reading and writing at levels that matched or exceeded their peers in town schools. Several had gone on to attend secondary schools in larger towns, something that would have been impossible without the foundation she had given them. On a warm summer evening in 1883, 5 years after that bullet had shattered the schoolhouse window and changed Teresa's life forever, she and Samuel sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard. Jacob was nearly 4 now, chasing fireflies with the determination of a born cowboy. Sarah was 18 months old, toddling after her brother on unsteady legs. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if Pemberton had not fired you?" Samuel asked, his arm around her shoulders. Teresa leaned into him, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I cannot regret how things turned out. Yes, what he did was wrong, and yes, it hurt terribly at the time. But if it had not happened, I might never have met you. I would not have these children, this home, this life. So in a strange way, I am grateful for it. It led me exactly where I needed to be." "I feel the same," Samuel said. "When I walked into that schoolhouse and saw you crying, something in me knew that you were important, that I needed to help you. I did not understand it then, but I understand now. It was not just about giving you a job. It was about finding the person I was meant to build a life with." Teresa tilted her head up to kiss him, a gesture that still felt as thrilling as it had that first time under the stars. "You saved me, Samuel Vance." "No," he said firmly, pulling her closer. "We saved each other. You gave me back my dreams, showed me that I deserved to be happy. You taught me that kindness is strength, not weakness. You made me believe in the future again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Teresa thought about all the children she had taught over the past 5 years, about the difference she had made in their lives. She thought about the community she and Samuel had helped build, where education was valued and where kindness was rewarded rather than punished. In town, she knew that the school still struggled. Pemberton and his allies had hired 3 different teachers in 5 years, none lasting more than a few months. The enrollment had dropped as families grew frustrated with the turnover and the rigid teaching methods. Some families had even moved their children to the ranching circuit, willing to send them to stay with relatives in the countryside so they could benefit from Teresa's instruction. Father Miguel had told her recently that there was talk of removing Pemberton from the school board, that people were finally speaking up about his poor leadership. Teresa hoped it was true. Not for herself, because she had no desire to return to that situation, but for the children in town who deserved better. As darkness fell and the children grew tired, Samuel carried Sarah inside while Teresa held Jacob's hand and guided him to bed. They tucked the children in together, working with the practiced ease of parents who had learned to move in harmony with each other. In their own bedroom later, as Teresa brushed her hair and Samuel pulled off his boots, he said, "Emma told me today that she thinks you are pregnant again." Teresa met his eyes in the mirror, a smile playing at her lips. Emma is very perceptive. Samuel was at her side in an instant, spinning her chair around to face him. "Is it true? Are we having another baby?" "We are," Teresa confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "I was going to tell you tomorrow, but I suppose now is as good a time as any." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "You make me so happy, Teresa. Every day with you is better than I ever imagined life could be." "I feel the same way," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "I never thought I could be this happy, this fulfilled. I have work that matters, a family I love, a husband who respects and cherishes me. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." Over the next several years, their family continued to grow. They had 2 more children, twin boys named Henry and Peter, born in the spring of 1884. The house that had seemed so spacious was now filled with the noise and chaos and joy of 4 young children. Teresa adjusted her teaching schedule, taking on slightly less travel and focusing more on the ranches closest to home. Other teachers had joined the circuit now, inspired by her example, and the network of ranch education had become an established institution in the territory. Parents paid fair wages, teachers were respected, and children received quality instruction regardless of their family's background or circumstances. In 1886, something remarkable happened. A delegation from the territorial government visited the ranching district to assess the education program. They interviewed teachers, parents, and students, and reviewed samples of student work. Their report was glowing, praising the innovative approach and the high quality of instruction. They recommended that similar programs be established in other rural areas throughout Arizona Territory. The report specifically mentioned Teresa by name, crediting her with founding the program and serving as its inspiration. When a copy of the report reached Willow Creek, it created quite a stir. Harold Pemberton, still clinging to his position on the school board despite growing opposition, dismissed it as government overreach. But many townspeople saw it differently. They saw a woman who had been fired for kindness, had gone on to create something significant, something that was now being held up as a model for the entire territory. The pressure on Pemberton finally became too great. In the fall of 1886, he was voted off the school board, and a new board was elected that included several parents who had supported Teresa. They immediately began implementing reforms, including a policy that explicitly prohibited discrimination based on ethnicity or economic status. One of their first acts was to send a letter to Teresa, apologizing on behalf of the town for how she had been treated and asking if she would consider returning as headmistress of the school at double her previous salary. The letter was sincere and heartfelt, and Teresa was touched by it. But her answer was no. Her life was on the ranch now, with Samuel and their children, teaching in the way she had found most effective and fulfilling. "I do not need their apology," she told Samuel when the letter arrived. "I stopped needing their approval a long time ago. I have everything I want right here." In 1889, Arizona Territory continued to grow and change. The railroad had reached more areas, bringing new settlers and opportunities. Willow Creek itself was expanding, with new businesses and a growing population. But the ranching district remained relatively unchanged, still built on hard work, community cooperation, and mutual respect. Samuel and Jake had expanded the Double R significantly, and Samuel now owned his own small herd in addition to the land his house sat on. He was not a wealthy man by any measure, but he provided well for his family and took pride in his work. More importantly, he had found the peace that had eluded him for so many years after the war. The nightmares that had once plagued him had faded, replaced by the contentment of a man who knew he was living a good life. On a crisp October evening in 1889, the ranching community gathered at the Double R for a celebration. It was the 10th anniversary of the founding of the teaching circuit, and families from all over the district came to mark the occasion. There was food and music, children running everywhere, adults laughing and sharing stories. Teresa stood with Samuel, watching the festivities, marveling at how much had changed in a decade. Johnny Vance, the boy who had been her first student on the circuit, was now 19 years old and planning to attend college in California to study engineering. Rosa Garcia, the little girl who had asked if she was sad on that terrible day when she was fired, was now a confident teenager who spoke 3 languages fluently and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Daniel Crawford, the ranch boy hungry for knowledge, had earned a scholarship to a university in the East. "Look what you built," Samuel said softly, gesturing to the crowd. "Look at all these lives you have touched." "We built it," Teresa corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you, without your courage to speak up that day and your willingness to help a stranger." "I think it was the smartest thing I ever did," Samuel said with a grin. "Offering you that job meant I got to marry you, so I came out pretty far ahead in that deal." Teresa laughed and leaned against him, still feeling that flutter in her chest when he smiled at her, even after 10 years of marriage. Their children were playing with the other ranch children. Jacob at 14 already showing signs of becoming as tall as his father. Sarah at 12 already displaying a gift for mathematics that rivaled Teresa's own, and the twins at 5 getting into the kind of mischief that only twins could devise. Father Miguel approached them, a cup of cider in his hand and a broad smile on his weathered face. "I wanted to tell you both how proud I am of what you have accomplished here," he said. "When I think about what happened 10 years ago, how those small-minded men tried to punish kindness, and I see all this, it reminds me that good does triumph in the end. It may take time, and the path may be difficult, but good triumphs." "Thank you, Father," Teresa said warmly. "Your support meant so much to me during those dark days. I only told you what I saw, a woman of courage and compassion who would find her way," the priest said. "You did the rest yourself. Well, with some help from this cowboy." He nodded at Samuel with a wink. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, someone called for Samuel and Teresa to say a few words. Reluctantly, they stood before the assembled crowd. Samuel spoke first, thanking everyone for their support of the teaching program and for welcoming Teresa into their community all those years ago. Then it was Teresa's turn. She looked out at the faces gathered before her, people who had become her family, and felt emotion welling up in her throat. 10 years ago, I thought my life was over, she began, her voice carrying in the quiet evening air. I had been fired from a job I loved, told that my kindness was a weakness, that caring about all children equally was somehow wrong. I felt lost and afraid and alone. But then, a cowboy walked into my classroom and said 5 words that changed everything. Teach our children instead. Those 5 words led to all of this, to a community built on the belief that every child deserves an education, that kindness is strength, and that we are better when we work together. I am grateful every single day for that moment, for Samuel's courage, and for the opportunity to be part of this remarkable community. You have given me more than a job. You have given me a home, a purpose, and a family. Thank you. There was not a dry eye in the crowd when she finished. The celebration continued late into the night, and when Teresa and Samuel finally returned home with their tired children, they sat for a moment on their porch, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. No regrets. Samuel asked, repeating the question he had asked years ago on that first ride to the Double R. Not a single one, Teresa said firmly. Not one. As the years continued to pass, their life maintained a steady, satisfying rhythm. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Jacob proved to be a natural horseman like his father, but he also inherited his mother's love of learning. He talked about becoming a veterinarian, wanting to combine his skill with animals with scientific knowledge. Sarah was brilliant with numbers and eventually wanted to become a teacher herself, inspired by watching her mother. The twins, Henry and Peter, were inseparable and constantly in motion. They had their father's build and their mother's dark coloring, and they approached life with a fearless enthusiasm that both delighted and terrified their parents in equal measure. In 1892, when Teresa was 36 and Samuel was 40, they welcomed a surprise 5th child, a daughter they named Emma Rose after Samuel's sister-in-law, who had become such a dear friend. Emma Vance insisted the baby's middle name be Rose, not Emma, so there would not be confusion, and she doted on her small namesake with unmistakable pride. By the mid-1890s, the ranching education program had expanded beyond anything Teresa had initially imagined. There were now 8 full-time traveling teachers covering a district that stretched for 70 miles in each direction. A small committee managed the program, and Teresa served as an advisor, though she had stepped back from the daily travel as her children required more of her attention. She still taught, but now primarily at her own home, where children from nearby ranches came for lessons. She had built a proper schoolhouse on their property, a gift from Samuel for their 15th anniversary. It had real desks, a blackboard, shelves full of books, and a big pot-bellied stove for warmth in winter. In 1896, Arizona Territory took another step toward eventual statehood, and education became an even bigger priority. The territorial government offered grants to rural teaching programs, and the ranching circuit received significant funding. This money allowed them to purchase more materials, pay teachers better wages, and even provide scholarships for exceptional students who wanted to continue their education beyond the basics. Rosa Garcia became one of the first recipients. Now 25 years old, she was accepted into a medical college in the East with financial support from the ranching community that had nurtured her education. Her parents wept with joy at the send-off party, and Rosa embraced Teresa tightly. "You told me to keep practicing my reading," Rosa said, tears streaming down her face. You told me to work hard, that I could do anything. I never forgot that, Miss Morgan. I never forgot how you believed in me when other people said a Mexican girl did not need education." "I am so proud of you," Teresa said, holding the young woman who had once been a little girl tugging on her skirt. "You are going to be an amazing doctor, and you are going to change lives. I know it." Moments like these reminded Teresa why she had fought so hard, why being fired for kindness had been worth enduring. Every student who succeeded, every child who discovered a love of learning, every young person who achieved something their parents had only dreamed of, it all validated the path she had taken. Samuel watched these moments too, watched his wife nurturing young minds and changing futures, and he fell in love with her all over again. Even after nearly 20 years of marriage, he still felt that same flutter he had experienced the first time he saw her crying in the schoolhouse. She had become more beautiful to him with each passing year, not despite the lines that time had etched around her eyes and the silver threads that had appeared in her dark hair, but because of them. Every line represented a smile, every silver hair a year of wisdom gained. One evening in the spring of 1898, after they had put little Emma to bed, and the older children were occupied with their own pursuits, Samuel and Teresa took one of their walks. They still did this regularly, still treasured this time alone together. They walked up to the rise where Samuel had proposed 20 years earlier, where they had stood countless times since to watch the sunset and talk about their day. "You remember the first time we came up here?" Samuel asked as they stood looking out over the valley. Their ranch house was visible below, lights glowing warmly in the windows. Beyond it, they could see the lights of the Double R and several other neighboring ranches. "Of course I remember," Teresa said, taking his hand. "You told me you wanted to court me properly. I was so surprised and so happy. I knew even then that I was falling in love with you." "I knew the first moment I saw you," Samuel admitted. "When I walked into that classroom and you looked up with tears on your face, something in my heart just knew." I had never believed in love at first sight before that moment, but there was no other explanation for what I felt. "You never told me that," Teresa said, turning to face him. "In all these years, you never said it was love at first sight." "I was trying to be proper, to court you the right way," Samuel said with a slight smile. "I did not want to scare you off by declaring my love before I had even taken you on a buggy ride. But it was true then, and it is true now. I loved you from that first moment, and I have loved you every moment since." Teresa felt tears well up in her eyes, the good kind that came from being overwhelmed with happiness. "I love you too, Samuel, more than I could ever put into words. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You gave me everything." They held each other close as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. Below them, their children were safe in the home they had built together. Around them, a community thrived that they had helped create. And between them was a love that had been tested by time and had only grown stronger. As they walked back down to the house hand in hand, Teresa reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. She thought about Harold Pemberton and the school board that had fired her, about how their cruelty had ultimately been the catalyst for something wonderful. She did not hate them anymore, had not for many years. Instead, she felt a kind of pity for them, for people who could not see beyond their own prejudices and limitations. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, always attuned to her moods. "About how grateful I am for the way things turned out," Teresa said. "Even the hard parts, even the painful moments, they all led here to this life with you." "I feel the same," Samuel said. "Every choice, every twist of fate, it all brought us together. I would not change a single thing." In 1900, as a new century dawned, Their oldest son, Jacob, graduated from veterinary school in California and returned to Arizona to open a practice serving the ranching district. He had met a young woman at school, a fellow student named Catherine, who shared his passion for animal medicine, and they married in the summer of 1901. It was the first wedding of Teresa and Samuel's children, and they watched with joy and a touch of bittersweet emotion as their son began his own adult life. Sarah, now 21, was teaching alongside her mother, having discovered that her true calling was indeed education. She had inherited Teresa's gift for reaching difficult students and her fierce belief that every child deserved a chance. Young men came calling, but Sarah was in no hurry to marry. She had goals she wanted to achieve first, and Teresa supported her daughter's independence completely. The twins, Henry and Peter, were 17 in 1901 and would soon be heading off to pursue their own dreams. Henry wanted to study law, inspired by seeing cases of injustice in the territory and wanting to fight for what was right. Peter was interested in engineering, fascinated by the new technologies that were beginning to transform the West. Teresa and Samuel were immensely proud of all their children, grateful that they had been able to provide them with the education and opportunities to pursue their passions. Little Emma was now 9 years old and showing signs of becoming an artist. She was constantly drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of the desert landscape and the people around her. Teresa made sure Emma had art supplies and encouraged this talent, remembering how important it was for children to develop all their gifts, not just academic ones. As Teresa entered her mid-40s, she began to think about her legacy, about what would happen to the teaching program when she was no longer around to guide it. She and Sarah began writing a comprehensive manual documenting their teaching methods, the curriculum they had developed, and the philosophy behind their approach. They wanted to ensure that the program would continue even after they were gone. In 1903, the manual was published by an educational press in the East, and it received widespread attention. Educators from all over the country wrote to Teresa asking questions, requesting advice, wanting to implement similar programs in their own rural areas. She responded to every letter, generous with her knowledge and experience, always emphasizing that the key to success was treating every child with respect and kindness, regardless of their background. That same year, she received an official commendation from the governor of Arizona Territory, recognizing her contributions to education. There was a ceremony in Phoenix, and Samuel accompanied her, both of them uncomfortable with the formal attention but grateful for the recognition of their work. Standing at the podium receiving the award, Teresa looked out at the assembled dignitaries and said, "25 years ago, I was fired from my teaching position for being too kind. The school board told me that I was wasting time on children who did not deserve extra help, that I was too soft. But a cowboy named Samuel Vance saw things differently. He said, 'Teach our children instead.' Those 4 words changed my life and the lives of hundreds of children. This award is not just for me. It belongs to Samuel, to the ranching families who took a chance on an untested program, to the other teachers who joined our mission, and most of all, to the students who proved that kindness is never wasted, that every child has potential, and that education is the most powerful tool we have for building a better future." The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Teresa's eyes were only on Samuel, sitting in the front row with tears running down his weathered face and pride shining in his gray-blue eyes. The years continued their steady march. In 1905, Sarah married a fellow teacher named Robert Green, and they took over the main teaching duties for the circuit together. Teresa stepped back further, focusing on the school at her home and spending more time with Emma, who needed her mother's guidance as she navigated her teenage years. Jacob and Catherine had given them 3 grandchildren by 1907, and Teresa discovered the special joy of being a grandmother. Samuel became Grandpa Sam to the little ones, and he doted on them shamelessly, just as he had with his own children. Henry graduated from law school and began practicing in Phoenix, fighting for the rights of small ranchers and workers who were often taken advantage of by larger interests. Peter became an engineer and worked on bringing electricity to rural areas, including eventually the ranching district where he had grown up. In 1910, when Teresa was 54 and Samuel was 62, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. The ranching community threw them a party that rivaled the one they had held for the 10th anniversary of the teaching program. There was food and music and speeches, and all 5 of their children were there with their own families. As Teresa looked around at the gathering, at the children and grandchildren playing together, at the friends who had become family, at the thriving community that had grown from such difficult beginnings, she felt a profound sense of completion. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned when she was a young woman in St. Louis, but it had turned out better than she could have imagined. Samuel gave a toast, his voice still strong despite his years. 30 years ago, I married the bravest, kindest, most stubborn woman I had ever met, he said, and everyone laughed. She had been knocked down by people who should have known better, but she got back up. She did not let their cruelty make her cruel. She did not let their small-mindedness make her small. Instead, she built something beautiful. She changed lives, including mine. Teresa, you are my best friend, my partner, my love. Here is to 30 more years together. I will drink to that, Teresa said, raising her glass, though you better plan on more than 30. I am not done with you yet, Samuel Vance. They kissed to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered, and Teresa felt 16 years old again, feeling that first flutter of love when he had held her hand on the rise overlooking the valley. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood. It was a momentous occasion, celebrated throughout the territory that was now officially a state. The ranching district held its own celebration, and Teresa and Samuel attended with their family. So much had changed since Teresa first arrived in the Arizona Territory in 1876. The wild, lawless frontier had given way to established communities, laws, and infrastructure. But the spirit of the people remained the same: hardy, independent, willing to help their neighbors, and committed to building something lasting. That same year, Teresa began writing her memoirs at the urging of her children. She was 56 now, and while she was still healthy and active, Sarah pointed out that her story needed to be preserved for future generations. People need to know what happened, Mother, Sarah said. They need to know how the teaching program started, how you fought against injustice and won. Your story matters. So Teresa began writing, documenting everything from her childhood in St. Louis to the death of her parents, her arrival in Arizona Territory, her work at the school in Willow Creek, the day she was fired, and everything that came after. She wrote about Samuel's courage in speaking up, about the ranching families who gave her a chance, about the children whose lives had been changed by education. The writing took 2 years. When it was finished, Sarah typed up the manuscript, and they sent it to several publishers. To their surprise and delight, it was accepted by a major publishing house in New York. The book was published in 1915 under the title Teaching with Kindness: One Woman's Journey in the Arizona Territory. The book was a modest success, selling particularly well in the West and among educators. Teresa received letters from women all over the country who who had been inspired by her story, who had faced their own discrimination, and found hope in her example. She answered every letter personally, always encouraging these women to persist, to fight for what was right, to never let others' limitations become their own. In 1918, the world was convulsed by the Great War in Europe, and even the remote ranching district felt its effects. Some of the young men from the area enlisted, including two of Teresa and Samuel's grandsons. It was a difficult time, filled with worry and uncertainty. But the community pulled together, as it always had, supporting the families with men overseas and praying for everyone's safe return. Both grandsons returned home safely in 1919, and the celebrations were heartfelt and joyous. By then, Teresa was 63 and Samuel was 71. Age had slowed them both somewhat, but they were still active and engaged with their community. They still took their evening walks, though they did not venture as far as they once had. They still held hands and talked about everything and nothing. On a warm evening in June of 1920, they sat on their porch watching the sun set, as they had done thousands of times before. Emma, now 28 and married to a fellow artist, had visited earlier in the day with her two children. All of their children were settled and happy, pursuing meaningful work and building their own families. The teaching program they had founded was stronger than ever, now an established institution with government support and a solid reputation. "We did all right, did not we?" Samuel said, his hand clasping Teresa's with the same gentleness he had shown 42 years earlier. "We did better than all right," Teresa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We built something lasting, Samuel, something that matters." "I meant us," Samuel clarified. "You and me, we did all right together." Teresa smiled and squeezed his hand. "We did perfect together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from blue to pink to purple. Inside the house, they could hear the grandfather clock ticking, marking the steady passage of time. Around them, the ranch was settling for the night, the familiar sounds of horses and cattle a comforting backdrop. "Do you remember that day in the schoolhouse?" Teresa asked suddenly. "When you walked in and found me crying?" "Every detail," Samuel said. "You were wearing a blue dress and there was glass on the floor from the broken window. You had been so strong all day for your students, but when you thought you were alone, you let yourself cry. I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met, to be facing such adversity and still putting the children first." "I remember you standing in the doorway," Teresa said, "this tall cowboy twisting his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable but determined. I had no idea that you were about to change my entire life." "I had no idea you were about to change mine," Samuel replied. "Funny how one decision, one moment of stepping up when you see something wrong, can alter the course of everything." "I am glad you stepped up," Teresa said softly. "I am glad you were brave enough to help a stranger." "Best decision I ever made," Samuel said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Marrying you was the second best. Having our children was third. Everything good in my life stems from that day in the schoolhouse." They stayed on the porch until full dark, reluctant to end the perfect evening. Finally, they went inside, arm in arm, to the home they had built together, the life they had created from nothing but determination, hard work, and love. In 1923, Teresa was 67 and Samuel was 75. They had been married for 44 years, and their love had only deepened with time. They had 9 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, a legacy that would carry forward long after they were gone. The teaching program they had founded had educated hundreds of children over 4 decades, and many of those children had gone on to remarkable achievements. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers, business owners, all of them traced their success back to the education they received through the ranching circuit. The program had been written about in national magazines and studied by education departments at universities. It stood as proof that with creativity, commitment, and compassion, even the most challenging educational problems could be solved. One afternoon in late spring, all of their children and many of their grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a family reunion. It was a chaotic, joyful event with multiple generations playing together, sharing meals and telling stories. As the sun began to set, and the family gathered for a group photograph, Teresa looked around at all these people who existed because she and Samuel had found each other, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Samuel and Teresa slipped outside for one last walk up to the rise. They moved slowly now, their steps measured and careful, but they were determined to reach the spot that held so many memories. At the top, they stood looking out over the valley, now dotted with electric lights that Peter had helped bring to the area. The ranch house below was full of their family, and the silence of the night was peaceful and complete. "If I could go back," Teresa said quietly, "back to that day when Pemberton fired me, and if I could change it, make it so I was never fired at all, I would not do it. Because that moment led to this, to us, to everything we built together. The pain was worth it, Samuel. Every bit of it was worth it." "I know what you mean," Samuel said, holding her close despite the ache in his joints. "All the hard times, the struggles, the setbacks, they were the price we paid for this happiness, and it was a price worth paying." They stood together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. They had been told that kindness was weakness, that caring too much was a flaw, but they had proven those voices wrong. Their kindness had been their strength, their compassion had been their power, and their love had been the foundation of everything good they had created. As they made their way slowly back down the hill, Samuel said, "I am tired, Teresa. These old bones are not what they used to be." "I know," she said gently. "Mine either, but we have lived a good life, Samuel. We have loved and been loved. We have made a difference. What more could we ask for?" "Nothing," he said firmly. "Nothing at all. I am content." They lived several more peaceful years together, watching their family continue to grow and flourish. Samuel's health began to decline in his late 70s, but he remained sharp-minded and good-humored until the end. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1925, just short of his 78th birthday, with Teresa beside him holding his hand. His loss left a hole in Teresa's heart that would never quite heal, but she was grateful for the nearly 5 decades they had shared. She took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had built, and in the memories of a love that had sustained her through everything. Teresa lived another 7 years, continuing to teach on a limited basis almost until the end. She died in the spring of 1932 at the age of 76, surrounded by her children and at peace with the world. At her funeral, the small church in Willow Creek was filled to capacity with current students, former students, fellow teachers, ranching families, and community members who had been touched by her work. Rosa Garcia, now Dr. Garcia and one of the few female physicians in Arizona, delivered a eulogy that had everyone in tears. Teresa Morgan Vance was fired for being too kind, Dr. Garcia said, her voice strong and clear. But that kindness changed lives. It certainly changed mine. Because of her belief in me, because of her refusal to see me as less worthy of education than any other child, I became a doctor. I have now delivered over 500 babies and saved countless lives. Every one of those lives exists because a teacher refused to give up on a little Mexican girl. That is the legacy of kindness. That is what Teresa built. They buried her next to Samuel on a hillside overlooking their ranch, the place where they had stood together so many times watching the sunset and dreaming of the future. On their shared gravestone, their children had inscribed, Samuel and Teresa Vance. They taught with kindness and built with love. The teaching program they founded continued for decades more, adapting to changing times, but always maintaining the core principle that every child deserves an education delivered with kindness and respect. The ranch school that Teresa had established on her property was eventually turned into a museum and educational center, preserving the history of rural education in Arizona. And in classrooms throughout the state and beyond, teachers continue to tell the story of a schoolteacher who was fired for being too kind, and the cowboy who said, "Teach our children instead." It became a reminder that standing up for what is right, that showing kindness in the face of cruelty, that refusing to accept injustice, these things matter. They change lives. They change the world. In the end, Teresa and Samuel's greatest legacy was not just the hundreds of children who received an education because of them, though that was significant. It was not just the teaching program that became a model for rural education across the country, though that was important. Their greatest legacy was the example they set, that love, kindness, courage, and determination could overcome any obstacle, could turn even the most painful setback into an opportunity for something beautiful. They proved that being fired for being too kind was not an ending, but a beginning. They proved that one person speaking up, one person offering help, could change the trajectory of a life. They proved that a teacher and a cowboy, two people from different worlds brought together by fate and choice, could build something lasting that would touch generations. Their story became legend in the small ranching communities of Arizona, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, a tale of true love and meaningful work and lives well lived. And always, always, the story ended the same way, with two people standing on a hill overlooking a valley, their hands clasped together, watching the sunset and knowing that despite all the hardships, despite all the obstacles, they had found exactly what they were meant to find, exactly where they were meant to be, exactly who they were meant to love. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, the moment when everything falls apart, is actually the universe pushing you toward where you were meant to be all along. Sometimes being fired for being too kind is the best thing that could ever happen, because it leads you to the cowboy who will change your life, to the work that will fulfill you, to the love that will sustain you, and to the legacy that will outlive you. Teresa and Samuel learned that lesson, lived that truth, and shared it with everyone they touched. And in doing so, they proved that kindness is never wasted, that love can overcome anything, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most painful beginnings. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though those moments existed. It was a love story of quiet steadiness, of daily choices to support and cherish each other, of building something together one day at a time. It was a love story that proved the most romantic thing in the world is simply showing up, being present, and choosing each other over and over again through all the years and all the changes. And so their story ends not with sadness, but with celebration. Celebration of lives well lived, of love well expressed, of work that mattered and legacy that endured. When people in Arizona speak of the golden age of rural education, they speak of Teresa and Samuel Vance. When they talk about standing up against injustice, they remember the teacher who was fired for kindness and the cowboy who gave her a chance. When they need an example of true love, they point to two people buried on a hillside, together in death as they were in life. Proof that the best love stories are not about finding perfection, but about finding the person who makes you want to be better, who sees your worth when others cannot, who stands beside you when the world seems against you. That was Teresa and Samuel. That was their gift to the world. And that gift continues to echo through time, inspiring new generations to choose kindness, to stand up for justice, to believe in love, and to never underestimate the power of one person saying at exactly the right moment, "Teach our children instead."